Our next and last interview of the day is with Michael Thompson of Michael Thompson Books, who is this year chairman of the LA Book Fair. And Michael, I'm going to ask you the same question I start everybody off with. Tell us a little bit about your background, family, schools, where you grew up. Give us a little idea of what you were like as a young person.
Gee. Well, I was born in Pocatello, Idaho in 1940. That's where Judy Garland was born on a stage, so the story goes. My father was from the South, stepfather was from the South. We moved back to Mississippi, and I graduated from high school at Trent Lott. I don't know that either one of those events had anything influence on me, but there you are. I moved back to California, where I've been ever since. I moved in '67 when I met Jake Zeitlin. It was Zeitlin and Verbrugge at a Newton conference in the University of Texas. I don't know, it's nothing terribly exciting. I had the same childhood as everybody else, up and down, loving parents who were having troubles, know.
The all-American story.
The all-American story, right.
What got you, what did you feel for books that made you want to be a bookseller? How did it happen for you?
I was a graduate student in philosophy in '66, and I was beginning to realize I didn't want to be a graduate student. My wife very nicely said I didn't have the derriere to be a scholar. One day, an issue of Time magazine showed up, and it had an article about men and women who in middle age changed to another profession, to the ministry. So I read it. This is when Time magazine was a real magazine instead of little dinky one-line things. And one man was quoted as saying he knew he was interested in religion because that's the section he turned to first when Time magazine showed up. And my wife said, well, that's obvious. You'd much rather be in a bookstore than any other place. Gee, you're right.
Absolutely.
Why? Who knows? My earliest memories when my stepfather was a carpenter putting himself through school was watching him build bookcases. It's nothing in the genes. I'm always reminded of a story of Robert Frost being asked when he became a poet. And he said, it's like asking a beautiful young girl when she became beautiful. It just happened. Yeah. I know that when I came to L.A. in '67 and went into Jake's big barn and saw all these old books all over the place, I knew I was home.
That was your first...
That was my first job. I had tried to get a job with Brick Row in Austin, Texas. That's when Franklin was still there. I didn't have any experience. About 6 months later, he came to L.A. for a book fair, and he walked in. There I was sitting at the front desk. And I said, getting experience.
And how long did you work for Jake?
5.5 years.
Did you go immediately after that into your own business?
Yeah. I was a library salesman in those days. Well, I still am. That's essentially my mission. And in those days, I knew Ben and Lou Weinstein of Heritage, and they let me be, in effect, their outdoor salesman. They let me take books on consignment and sell them, and when I got paid, I paid them unless the rent was due, and then I paid the rent. But that's essentially how it was. A couple of years later, I rented an office. A couple of years later, I opened a store. And it's been tough sledding, up and down, bouncing along, mostly tough because of my own crazy way of doing things. But it's been a wonderful, wonderful life, I love
I understand you recently closed your shop.
We closed the shop in L.A. and everywhere, I guess. The Internet has killed the small book, inexpensive book market. I mean, it's so easy to buy it on so many other places. And the rent's going up, When our rent was $2,000, as it had been for 10 years, we were happy to stay. When they raised it to $65, it was time to move. And so we rented a small office about a half a block away, took the cheap books home. They're still on the Internet. 4 or 5 of them sell a week. And in the office, we're working into becoming full-time antiquarian booksellers.
Besides Jake Zeitlin, what other booksellers were sort of mentors or guided you on your path as a young bookseller?
Well, L.A. had a number of people at those times that were heroes, mentors. One, Max Hunley. There was only one Max Hunley.
I love that.
Bennett and Marshall, old Krusty Bob, the professional Scot. I liked to hang around there. I had a hard time drinking his Scotch whiskey, but as you know, I drank everything else. I don't know. Dealers in general, I was just telling someone a few minutes ago that the biggest professional mistake I made was not joining the association about 20 years before. When I did join, I had the wonderful option of every person writing a letter and sponsoring me could have been, like yourself, a former president of the association.
Yes.
I mean, there were 5 or 6 guys that I knew well enough. I knew Ed Glazer when he was out on the road like I was.
Yeah.
We met at Toronto book fairs and so on and so forth. So it was a whole bunch of people.
No one, other than Jake, no one specific.
No one specific, I don't think, no.
Well, you grew up in an era where L.A. had a very vibrant book-selling community.
True. That's true.
And now as I look around, as you've done, they're closing shops left and right.
Very few on this street.
Bill Daly closed his shop, I heard.
Yes. He's working out of his house. It's very accessible. It's right off of a main street, so you can find him. But, it's closing down,
Talk a little bit about the Internet, how it's affected your business, and how you've been able to transition from non-computer to computer.
Right. Well, as I just said, it really killed the scholarly book market. The whole definition of scarce is gone. A guy could have a book that he got every other year in his field, and he could honestly tell his customer it was a scarce book. Now you look online, and there are 10 of them. Now, they may be all the way from England to Finland, but obviously it's not scarce in the same way. Human nature, you look online trying to figure out what to price your book. There are 10 copies, some of them going way down. You price yours at the bottom. You have to sell it, On the other hand, you have another book in your hand, and there are 2 copies, the price goes up. On the other hand, the Internet has made everything so much faster and so much more accessible. I'm online all the time. First thing I do every morning is answer my mail, which means getting rid of 40 pieces of spam.
Me too. There's so much
Oh,
garbage.
God, it's horrible. I got a letter from... It was right in the midst of all this mail. It was just last week, and it said, Warren Christopher wants to talk to you. Please write this address. And I thought, and the Queen, too. So I got to the end of my stuff, and there was another letter, honest. Warren Christopher would like to speak to you. He needs these books appraised. So I wrote the office and I said, I'm sorry, I thought it was spam, And they wrote back and said, we understand, it happens to us all the time. And a few minutes later, the Warren Christopher called me. And the long and the short is, it's the next week I'm going to go try and figure out what to do with his books and papers and so on.
That'd be great.
But, that was a totally new media age sort of awareness. If I'd heard... If I'd been called to the phone by my wife, say Warren Christopher, I'd have gone and picked it up.
Right.
But very different.
But you get an email, and I've been getting emails with all these weird things, insurance. God only knows what.
Sure.
And sometimes I'm flaming something that I shouldn't be flaming.
Yes.
What percentage of your stock have you bought via the Internet?
Of our antiquarian stock, which is increasingly all we deal in, a large percentage of it. It's much harder, as you know, to buy in stores, the ones that are still here, and at fairs, because everybody's going to the same source for pricing. It used to be that if you bought a really nice book and it was out of your field, you priced it cheap because you wanted to be safe, and you were very happy for the specialist to buy it and make his profit.
Right.
Now, everybody looks and sees, and so the pricing is much more uniform. but increasingly a lot of it is off of the net.
Do you sell a good percentage on the net?
Yes.
You said you sold about 4 or 5 books a week out of
that's
the
that's
cheaper stuff.
entirely on the net. The antiquarian stuff, that's increasingly more. You know, even the occasional $1,000 or $2,000 book is off the net. A lot of it is in Europe, and so partly
because
I
of
think
the money.
Yeah, I think partly, but it's increasingly the net. You know, and I don't mind. I mean, we've all learned how to read between the lines and find out whether this guy is really real and so on. And it's so wonderful. You put a message out. Has anybody had any experience, good or bad, with Pete Jones? You know,
and there come the answers come in.
In
he's
seconds.
Okay.
Yeah, he's
okay, Michael.
Yeah, that's right. And that's wonderful, of course.
I think it's really good. And it also, if there's a problem, if a book is stolen.
Yes.
In the old days, we used to have the thing called the tree,
right,
where everybody had a responsibility.
Right.
Now somebody puts something on the internet, and seconds later,
everybody
knows.
Yeah,
all
from
over
Nairobi to
everybody
Hong Kong,
knows about it.
Sure.
And I think it's a wonderful preventive for thieves to do that kind of thing. Although they still do it.
Of course.
When you before you closed your shop, did you find that you had more or less traffic as time went on? Did your shop sort of go downhill traffic-wise?
Yeah, less all the time. That's why, you know, we more or less knew that one of these days we were going to have to close it and so on. We would have stayed at the rent of $2,000 a month, but when they made it $65, yeah.
As you sit here, Michael, what do you think are the greatest challenges this business faces in the future?
Well, we're already facing the biggest one, the net and that sort of thing. I, in particular, as a library seller, am facing the fact that, as Richard Landon put it, I worked my way out of a job. I've already sold a lot of this stuff. Yeah. Decreasing budgets for the libraries has certainly hurt my sort of book selling. It might very well be, as I've heard people smarter than I argue, that as text can be available online and less libraries want them, some libraries are going to start selling them. And so it might be, I don't know if it'll happen in our lifetime, but it might be that one of these days a lot of these rare books are a lot more common. I remember in my youth sitting around with a bunch of the seniors, the deans, you know, and they were lamenting what reprints were going to do. They're going to kill us and so on. Yeah. In fact, it was the other way around. You know, it allowed the library that just wanted the text or a photocopy of the first edition to buy that, and they didn't have to have it. So it could go to the customer who really did want it, and a lot of those customers were private customers. I don't know. You know, there's the changing times of what's available, what people want. Again, in my youth, I was told never to buy a religious incunable. That's about all you see anymore, you know.
That's about it.
Don't buy a made-up incunable.
Well,
they're everywhere. What can you
do?
Yeah, that's right. Things that people fought over and spent a lot of time and money on 50 or 100 years ago, people no longer care about, but look what they pay for Bukowski.
Yeah.
You know, so the world changes. I don't think this is doom and gloom. I think the world changes.
If a young bookseller comes to you and says, Mr. Thompson, what would be your 2 or 3 good things of advice for me if I want to be a successful bookseller, what would you tell that person?
Go work for somebody for as long as you can, a year maybe. Don't work for them as a hobby. Work for them seriously. You've got to show up at 8 in the morning and open the door and all that sort of stuff. Don't do it unless you're absolutely in love with it. You know, it's like acting and, well, most professions. You know, if you don't really want to be a lawyer, you shouldn't do it. Yeah. Helps an awful lot to have money. Yeah. Helps an awful lot to have a strong back and knees, especially as you get older. Find your particular intellectual and commercial area, medium, you know. David Lesser sells pamphlets of early American law and legal history and so on. It bores me to tears. But David's one of my best friends.
He's a hell of a good bookseller.
Oh, he is a very good one. He's probably going to be elected into Groyer tonight.
Oh, that'd be nice.
Yeah, yeah. I've been sponsoring him, and he's come through the works. I don't know. You know, it's...
There's lots of questions and
lots
not
of
too many
questions,
answers.
yeah.
What part in your career does your staff play?
Oh, very important part. I don't really have a staff other than my wife and our partner, Carol. The three of us are partners. We each do our own thing. Kathleen is pretty much stays in the store because she doesn't like to travel. She's had the bookkeeping job pushed on her, which she's ill-prepared for, but she does it.
Yeah, she does.
Carol is the cataloger. I'm the salesman, indoors and outdoors. There's a lot of fuzzy overplay all the way around. Carol's very, very accomplished, a lot of experience working for Heritage and so on. We'd be hard-pressed for any of the three of us to die or disappear or something. It would be very difficult replacing, you know. Not that we couldn't, but it'd be very difficult.
What do you see for yourself in the future? Will you continue to keep the small office? Will you continue to do work out of your house? Will you continue to have the triad?
Yes, yes. We don't anticipate, you know, we'd like a larger office. I don't want to go home. First of all, we have a small house, and secondly, I at least have to get out.
Yeah, I know the feeling.
It can be anywhere, but I have to leave the house and go do it. A larger office, probably. Maybe if I won the lottery, I'd hire a couple of youngsters to schlep this stuff, so on and so forth. But all I hope for and look for is decent enough health that I can more or less sell books to the end, you know. I don't worry about dying. I just don't want to have a debilitating stroke.
Yeah,
I'm very fortunate that I love what I'm doing, and, you know, God willing, if my health held up, I'd do it till I was 100. I really would.
I feel the same way.
Yeah, I know you do.
Michael, thanks for the interview.
You're very
welcome.
welcome.
Thanks for your time and your insight.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.